Hello, my name's Sheree Meredith from Hamilton Community Foundation, and you're watching Hamilton's Vital Signs. This is the program where we talk about issues that are important to Hamilton's vitality and well-being. So today we have three guests, and we're focusing on philanthropy. November is National Philanthropy Month, and so it's a wonderful time, first of all, to say thank you for the difference you make in our community, but also to step back and think about what does philanthropy look like these days. And I think we're going to have a dynamic, interesting discussion because there's a lot changing and there's a lot of excitement going on in the philanthropic world. At Hamilton Community Foundation, we think about this every day, and we have an opportunity really to talk to some most interesting people doing some very remarkable things. So today we have three guests on our show. First of all, we have Alyssa Lai, who's very active in all sorts of ways, which she can tell you more about in the community, including being a donor with the Community Foundation and one of the leaders in our Women for Change program. We have Mr. Fred Losani, who's CEO of Losani Homes, again an active philanthropist both in our community and internationally. And we have Paul Nazareth, who's with the Canadian Association of Gift Planners and an expert on the various forms of gift planning and the difference you can make. So welcome to the three of you. Paul, I want to start with you because I've heard you speak many times about the range of giving and how it changes over the life cycle, the interests, the opportunities. Can you sort of lay a bit of a picture out for us about how that often looks?
Sure. There's a number of things happening right now across Canada, both in terms of the trends of giving, but also as Canada's changing. Right now, today in 2018, Canada, for the first time ever, is older than it is younger. And as we think about how the people who give really think about the ways that they give and do that, we're really moving from a culture of charitable giving from cash to considering the gifts of assets. So that's one of the challenges that even the charities face. How do we talk about this? Because there's tax involved, there's planning involved, and that's what we do at the Gift Planning Association to work with both the donors and the advisors. But we're also flipping the age and stage cycle right on its head. For many years, it was young people were very engaged and older people gave that money, and there was the whole patronage kind of concept and then private foundations, whereas today, we're disrupting the whole system. We've got young people who are engaged. We've got young people who are in leadership, both in giving and what they're doing. Again, we were just chatting before, and Alyssa is a great example of that, who is not just engaged as a donor, but is a leader, as a thinker in the space. And we've got more vehicles to change that. Between the gifts of assets, we've got donor advised funds, we've got community foundations more active than ever, and advisors who are really involved in the process more than they've ever been.
So it's getting a lot more complex,
that too,
a lot more exciting, and probably a lot more impact too.
Wonderfully so. There's a lot more giving, there's a lot more people trying to do good, and there's a lot more vehicles to do so than ever. So as much as there's complexity, we are living wonderfully enough in a golden age of philanthropy.
Yeah. So Fred, I'm aware of a little bit of what you do in the community, but can you talk about your giving? And I've also read some of your philosophy. I'd love to hear more about why you do that.
Our exposure and the initiatives that we took initially in wanting to become involved from a social responsibility perspective was quite traditional in nature. It was just giving. It was a gift. And we soon came to understand that being able to connect that and use those opportunities, because of some of the expeditions I've done and so on, was a great opportunity to educate and then to pass on that gift of caring and understanding of your social responsibility.
So your Bruce Trail expedition was a great example of that education piece.
Yes, it was, and I think it helped to mobilize, or at least to wake up in the minds of a lot of young people what their responsibility might look like down into the future. What we carried on to do after that, through our community foundation and through the partners that we've developed corporately and through our friendships and families, is that we've tried to create a larger dynamic, a larger group of individuals who were like-minded, shared the same kinds of values, and wanted to see the same kind of impact and change.
You talk about the values. Can you talk about that a little bit more? Because that's often at the heart of it, like the why.
From a corporate perspective, there's a lot of things that are going to tug at you when it comes to making decisions about the kind of people that you want to deal with. And oftentimes, because it is a for-profit scenario, those decisions might not always come in the form of good feel. You might not always be dealing with the individuals of the greatest integrity. We made a conscious decision to ensure that we were dealing with individuals that would support causes within their communities and abroad. And we made a conscious decision to say that, you know, we'd rather not, you know, put those values aside for profit purposes only. What we found in pursuing that is that the people who shared our values were also the people we wanted to do business with and did best for business. And it creates this great support around this idea of profit with purpose. And from there, it's just kept on growing into an idea of how we can create change and acceptance of this kind of a mindset amongst all of the partners that we're engaged with. And then finally, with our connection with the We Foundation and everyone else and all the youth that we work with. Now it's been one of mentorship, you know, and teaching and learning. And so it's been really satisfying the way that's evolved.
Because it's your corporation and your family very much.
Oh, incredibly so. You know, my children have been involved. This coming June, we'll go on our 6th family trip between Ecuador, India, and Kenya. And we've introduced several families who've introduced several of their corporate friends. And so it's the idea, though, of that domino effect of our impact has been the one that's caused the greatest effect.
And I think when you describe it too, one of the things I hear more often is that people want to have a local influence, but also the focus is broader. So there's this real international impact. You can
yes, you know, a lot of it had to do with what kind of an impact are these initiatives making on my children, and then on the youth in our communities. And I felt that having a balance between showing the impact it could make, you know, here at home through hospitals and through the children's organizations, but then connecting it with a greater understanding of what our responsibilities are abroad has made it much easier to connect with.
Alyssa, can I ask you about why you do it and how you choose your involvement?
That's a really interesting question, because the notion of philanthropy, I've never actually heard of it until I came to Canada when I was 18 years old.
It's kind of an old-fashioned word.
It is a very interesting framework in terms of how I first thought of philanthropy in the first place. When I first started philanthropy, it has to do with a lot of the traditional thinking of dollar value, the wealth of it. It was more transactional. And I think the more I delve into it and the more I think about it, it's really a relationship. And I think a big thing about what's important to me as to why I give is my relationship with the organization, my relationship with the causes that are near and dear to me, but also my desire to learn about certain issues that are affecting, you know, the world and are affecting my community. And I find that philanthropy, it is a full circle and a whole package for me, because it's part of my identity and it's part of how I live my life. A big thing for me is that for me to start moving past thinking of it as just a dollar value, but thinking of it as an everyday practice. What are the things, you know, that are dear to me, and how do I want to, you know, not just make a difference, but figure out, you know, how to draw the different connections and why things are happening in the world. And over time, I've learned that philanthropy is not just passive, it's also very active. And I think to move past the passive giving, the passive, you know, notion of giving, and to really take into account the full package of, you know, your ties, your connections, your time, and, you know, your treasures, could really have, you know, tremendous impact on what you choose to support.
Because you both have a lot of influence. You were talking about how you influence others you work with through your connections, what you introduce people to, the arguments you have with people around certain things, or the version you take. It all affects change and makes a difference in the community. Did you? How did you come to this? Do you think it's a generational perspective, or from your family, or is it? What's at the heart of it?
I often wonder that, because I wonder the expectations and the changes that we see in philanthropy. Is it age specific, or is it as a result of the evolving world that we see right now? Partially has to do with there's so many more ways to give, and not just to charities, although there are over 86,000 registered charities here in Canada. But they, like Paul said, it is the golden age of giving. There's no shortage of ways where you give your time, talents, and treasures. And I would say, you know, it's really thinking hard about where you want to align yourself, but also drawing those connections, and not just give passively. Darren Walker from the Ford Foundation, you know, wrote an op-ed piece a couple of years back saying, you know, how giving back isn't enough. And what struck me is that he say when you give to a space such as a shelter, you don't only give, but you should be asking why and how homelessness exists in the first place.
Yeah.
And that was an aha moment for me, because sometimes when you give, you thought that the relationship ends after giving the money, but it doesn't have to be that way. There's an opportunity to educate yourself, but there's an opportunity to also challenge yourself to figure out, what are the real systemic barriers that affect us today.
Do you find with your children that they have a different view than you, Fred? Or when you were talking about, when Alyssa was mentioning, you don't know whether it's generational differences or just...
It's a good question, and I'll say that, I had an aha moment as well. I mean, a very significant one several years ago, and it just made sense. Everything kind of started to make sense for me. There was an idea that I wanted to be motivated further by a purpose.
Yeah.
But I think it all comes back to, in our circumstance, our family, that my parents are immigrants, and so the help that our church, gave to us when we arrived over with very little.
Yeah.
My first winter coats, and that's
Yeah.
came from our church. So I think that it was
deeply
ingrained.
rooted.
It's just a matter of making that connection, of what happened historically, how you are as you are now, and what awakenings are taking place within yourself that lead you to be connected.
So we are about ready to go for a break, but when we come back, I want to talk more about some of these trends and some of the breakthroughs that you're making, because you're both leaders in philanthropy and in doing new and exciting things. So we're going to stop for a short break, and then we'll be back for some, I think, interesting discussion. Thanks.
What is Rotary? We're a network of people like you. In fact, we're the original social network. More than 1 million of us live just about everywhere you can think of. We get together to exchange ideas, grow our businesses, and make new friends. We volunteer to help our own communities or someone else's. We're right around the corner. Come join us. The name is Rotary International. You're welcome.
You can never really be ready for the news that it's not an ear infection anymore, that it's cancer.
The Make-A-Wish Foundation gives hope, strength, and joy by granting magical wishes to children with life-threatening medical conditions.
Someone came in from Make-A-Wish Foundation, and they told us we were going to get a wish. Annabelle can play soccer, and she can do ballet. Everything seems so much bigger and better. Help us make a wish for a happy ending.
Welcome back. I'm Sheree Meredith from Hamilton Community Foundation, and today we're talking about philanthropy with our guests Alyssa Lai, Fred Losani, and Paul Nazareth. So before the break, we were just getting into the sort of understanding from each of you the why you are involved and some of the things that you're finding interesting today. And Paul, I want to go back to you again, if we could, to start. When you were listening to Fred and Alyssa, what trends were you hearing? Because lots of exciting things, I think, in the meet there.
A lot of it is about the intention to have a greater impact. And as much as very often we find the enthusiasm and the creativity that comes from both things like children and young people, part of it is we have a greater impact in life when we learn more. And through our experience and expertise, we do more in the business sector, in the community sector, and the charitable giving side. Right? We were just talking before the show about a gift that you recently made, and instead of writing a traditional check, you use stocks or securities to do that, because you can have a greater impact, not just thinking about the why, but also the how. So using now gifts like securities, considering how to work with the community foundation, multiplying the impact of dollars to things like life insurance and talking to advisors is one of the ways that people say, how can I make what I was already giving go further? So that's one of the great trends we're seeing of people saying, how can I use the capital and opportunities I have of both money and network to do more?
So there's the giving kinds of trends, and then there's the roles, I think, that people are playing. And Fred, you were starting to talk before we actually got going about some of the innovative things that you're involved in as a corporation and some of the things that are being thought about, I guess, as the potential for influencing change.
We became involved with the We organization specifically, and we started to work in ways that we would be able to start to mobilize a cultural shift, if you will, with youth out there. And I mean, their We Days are phenomenal and legendary, and the way that they've been able to make an impact. You mentioned earlier, how's this changed how your children different, Well, they introduced We to us. The We committees that they have in the various schools across Canada and U.S. and so on have made a huge change in the way that young people are thinking about their place in being able to do better. And you mentioned earlier about my kids. My son has now raised money to build 3 schools in Kenya that he's opening in June, and my daughter's going on a month-long trip for a leadership and training course. My son's been on 3 trips on his own. They represent, to a certain extent, that cultural shift that's taking place amongst our youth. And the new organization that I'm a part of now with We, which has to do with teaching and harnessing social enterprise attitudes, is changing the way everything thinks. You look at that youth under 35, I call them young, I'm 55, I say youth.
Everybody younger than you is young.
Because if I was starting up an organization and I see them starting up organizations, they wouldn't even think, and I believe they don't even think about starting off an organization and a mission without at least first finding out what their connection to social responsibility is going to be. It's in their mission statement. I don't think they would ever start an enterprise without that being front and center.
Yeah. Well, and it comes back to the social justice concept too, right? That, I mean, it's not just young people talking about it, but you hear a lot more. I mean, can you talk a little bit more about that and what that means to you and people of your generation? Because that's some of what I'm hearing about your kids too.
Yeah, as the saying goes, right, you can't be what you can't see, and I really think philanthropy has a role to play as well in that. And I think to be able to see people, everyday people that can make a difference, no matter how small, how big and small, is extremely important. And going back to what I talked about, the power dynamics in philanthropy, there's a saying that used to go, philanthropy empower things. But one would challenge and say, the notion of empowering is problematic because there is power already inherent in a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations. But what philanthropy can do is create space and create conditions where that power can manifest itself. And to me, that's what the real power of philanthropy is. Not empowering, but rather creating space and conditions for people and organizations and communities to thrive by themselves. And in that lens, the concept of, equity in philanthropy, social justice in philanthropy really takes it a step further because it's removing the passivity of philanthropy and to really push hard and start questioning, how we actually frame things and how giving happens and how we could challenge that to make sure that it's equitable where people could see themselves as part of it, no matter how big or small or young you are.
I hear this from a lot of young people that we work with. Their parents may have done certain things and then they say, but I'm really concerned about the decrease in democracy around the world. What can we do about that? And we go, okay, well, it's this big vision. I see you nodding your head a lot. Is this capturing some of the things you're hearing across the country, Paul, as you're talking with people?
And actually I was excited because, even in Spectator and different places, it's really been exciting to see some of the networks that are working on this. So this is part of the Civic Action Fellowship around how do we help young professionals to understand all the existing frameworks and then come together to see how they can not just disrupt but work with what's existing because they'll be able to move faster. What's the funding? What are the network abilities? What's the civic plug into that? It's really powerful to be able to activate those so that you can move faster and have a larger impact.
And the partnerships that you were referring to earlier too, Fred, and business playing different roles, so business and government and citizens and and service providers working together to create different conditions, to create different opportunities for people that improve society. It's like the whole thing's being shaken up a little bit, and it's not the traditional write a check, help somebody. It's a very different lens we're looking at. One of the things we've been talking about lately is that maybe this is part of being a good citizen or being an engaged citizen. And maybe that's the sort of lens we should be looking at. Because certainly when I hear about you talking about your kids and their view, you know, it's part of their DNA, right? Like it's part of how they think about things. It's not something they do on the side. It's part of their being.
You know, I'm really impressed by the youth of today and their engagement. And I think that it happens at every level.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's a consumer making a decision to buy a product from a company that has that is involved in social justice, if it is, which in some cases, as you'll see in today's environment, you know, there are some companies that will take a stand that might not be popular for them from a business perspective, but it voices an opinion that matters out there. The youth have a long way to go to, I think, maximize their potential as it relates to being able to impact. I'm not saying they should become involved, you know, in every aspect of things, but my daughter was down at the border in Mexico watching, you know, migrants being caged up behind fences.
Yeah.
That was an incredibly impactful moment for her, and so it goes a long way to her understanding of her active involvement in trying to create change. So I got to tell you, I think things look wonderful for tomorrow, and I think that the traditional, like individuals involved in traditional giving, as an example, more and more I think that understanding that, you know, for those who have the capacity, leave your kids enough, but not too much.
Yes, yes,
and I think that
great piece
matters,
of wisdom,
you know?
isn't it?
So I think that guys like Paul are going to be busy for a long time if people take that wisely.
Yeah.
There are a few things that I'm teasing out from what Fred is saying is the concept of intergenerational exchange in terms of the knowledges and experiences that shape us as residents and citizens, and how we choose to put meaning and purpose in what we do.
Yeah.
I would say that the generations that Paul and Fred were in no way the same kind of experiences that I've had, but there's something to be learned in how we choose to, you know, sort out meaning in our actions and do what we do. And I think part of philanthropy is that the evolution of it should include that intergenerational exchange and learning, because we live in a time where it's very volatile, and we live in a time where there's so much opportunity, but sometimes making sense of it could be difficult, even whether you're young or you're old. So I think some level of, you know, exchange there would be extremely important, and I've certainly have benefited from many other people from different walks of life, ages, backgrounds, who share with me why they give and also what gives them purpose.
So we need to find and create spaces for that to happen, don't we? I mean, it obviously can happen within families, but the richness of talking across generations and learning from each other up and down the generational ladder. I mean, you've both talked about not only how you mentor younger ones, but how you've learned from your kids or been inspired and admire what your kids are doing truly. And that kind of discussion doesn't always just happen. It has to, we have to purposefully look for opportunities for that. We're almost at the end of our time, but I want to give sort of a minute to each of you to say any final word, final thought, final advice, thing that most excites you, whatever that final word is, okay? Paul, do you want to start?
Sure. You know, this is the time of year where people get really generous, and so very much they lead with the heart. But just like, you know, you were sharing that you want to lead with the heart, but you want to give smart. So think about the organizations you're giving to them. Think about not just the why, but the how. Use the resources that we have today. You know, we got to give the Canada Revenue Agency some credit. We have some of the greatest tax opportunities in the Western world. And so that's what people can talk to the foundation about, structuring their giving, but also thinking about local organizations. You look at what Hamilton Food Share is doing. They're one of the most dynamic food organizations, not just alleviating that need, but thinking dynamically about power structures, about the future, about civic activation. So even our own organizations are evolving, and that's a wonderful role that the foundation can play to help us bridge head and heart.
Thank you. Alyssa, final word.
Well, I was going to thought you're going to go to Fred, but anyway.
I'm just shaking it up.
I would say my message goes out to any young person out there who, about philanthropy, if they're considering it, is to remove the wealth equation. I would say from my own personal experience, I started consciously giving to the university the year after I've graduated. Not a lot of money, but every year I made a conscious decision to increase my donation as my income increased. Again, incremental increases, right?
Yes.
And I think part of that whole reason why I do it, because to me, philanthropy is the long-term journey. and it's not a one-off. And I think that's an important consideration where you talk about how you give and talk about, you know, how it connects with you. And I want to say that really when you remove the wealth equation out of it, you can start to think about the possibilities that comes with philanthropy. And
it opens it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, how fun and social that can be, and how you're not only giving, but you're also learning and enjoying as well. So that would be my last parting thought.
And Fred,
well,
final
first
word.
of all, Alyssa and Paul, I'd like to thank you guys. I learned a lot from, you know, listening to both of you, of course. I would say to individuals that are paying attention, that, you know, as Alyssa said, it is incredible to be involved in whatever way you can, and you know the power of large numbers, you know, can make a real difference out there. I would also add that you know, partners like the Hamilton Community Foundation have been fantastic for us, because trying to set up a proper you know, family foundation is very difficult, but partners like the Community Foundation make it very easy. You know, they provide guidance and they provide the structure that enables you to be able to do it effectively and transparently. But generally, you know, I evolve and live in the business world, and what becoming involved as an active participant in the philanthropic space has been incredibly, you know, gratifying for us as a family and as a company, giving meaning to what we do. And for any you know, budding entrepreneur out there, the term social entrepreneurialism is a must.
Yeah.
It's something that they have to understand and make a part of their DNA, and to make sure that they pass it on.
Well, I don't think we could end with any better words of inspiration, and lots of food for thought, too. So thank you all very much. And I'm afraid it's time to sign off now. I'd love to continue this conversation, but I'd really like to extend sincere thanks to our guests, Alyssa Lai, Fred Losani, and Paul Nazareth, and to all of you for joining us today. And so on behalf of Hamilton Community Foundation, thank you for joining Hamilton's Vital Signs. And I hope you will come back again next month when our regular host, Terry Cook, will be back. And just as a reminder, you can watch the show and any previous shows on Cable 14, and you can read more about it on our website, hamiltoncommunityfoundation.ca. Follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. Thank you once again.